Hello, I'm Chris Cook with CollabSoft, and this is the first in the series of video essays we're going to be doing about getting developers and designers to collaborate together better. So if you enjoy it, let us know, like and subscribe for more. If you don't, want to hear that in the comments as well. Let's get into it. Great developer-designer collaboration is impossible. And the reason we talk about this is because sometimes these relationships just don't work out. The people involved are too different, and they fail to communicate. There's a lack of trust, all of the above. And so developer-designer collaboration can seem like a completely mismatched couple trying to make it work for the sake of the kids, in this case, their app that needs them, right? The best solution for this is just leave them alone. They can sleep in separate bedrooms, do their own things. This does create very siloed independent working, but that is often what is required from these two groups, or requested at least. So I think in order for the parents to make great decisions about the kids together, designers and developers need to collaborate better to deliver a truly great feature. So, does one of these groups need to change? Is there a middle ground for them to meet in? Let's get into it. Because basically, if a good designer-developer collaboration doesn't happen, the ones that end up losing out are the end customers. So, let's figure out how to get these two groups back in bed together. Now, designers versus developers. What is the root cause of these problems? In our experience, there are four main reasons why developer collaboration with designers breaks down. So, number one, they just have different, incompatible brains. Well, some people are meant for each other, and designers and developers fall into this bucket. They are clearly very different people. Be like a room full of scientists and religious people. It won't be long before someone flips the table if you lock them in a room. I'll leave you to decide who's who in this metaphor, but designers are very theoretical, right? They like to use their creative and imaginative right brains, whereas developers are obviously more practical, relying on logical, analytical, left brain thinking. So a designer's imagination has no bounds, and neither should their tools. If a designer is making a user interface in Figma, that tool isn't going to tell you whether a screen's too big for a certain mobile device. Figma just lets you build a utopia, right? And then the developer has to come along and code the thing, which is when shit gets real. So be the same as an architect designing a building with floating floors, right? It's only when it comes time to build the thing that the laws of physics get involved. The second problem is that developers speak in code. They write in code, they think in code, and they speak in it too. But code is not a designer's first language. Developers are speaking in things like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but designers speak in colors, fonts, layout. So what makes this language barrier even trickier is that designers and developers sometimes use the same words to mean different things. A button to a designer might not be a button to a developer. It might just be a link. Third thing, designers and developers have completely different objectives. So although developers and designers have the same overarching goals to make great software, their day-to-day objectives differ quite a bit. A designer might want a bold or unconventional layout to grab attention, whereas a developer's priority would be maintainability and compatibility with legacy systems. Similarly, a designer might want to use an image with a large file size, whereas a developer's concerns would be to reduce loading times. So this means that sometimes the ideas the designer has are unrealistic because they haven't considered the technical constraints. The different tools and processes to development versus design. Naturally, developers and designers use different tools. Developers write code in integrated development environments like Versus Code, and then they use Jira to manage the workflow. Designers, however, are working in user experience design tools such as Figma. So there isn't much overlap between these tools because developers and designers are doing different jobs and different systems. I wouldn't use Figma to write a block any more than a designer would use Microsoft Word to make an image. Development is all about logic, making stuff work and following a process, whereas design should be more explorative and unstructured and a bit chaotic, which is why designers love to work on infinite canvases filled with theoretical compositions of shapes and colors. Don't have to necessarily work or be correct, especially in the whiteboarding stage. So different tools do mean that developers and designers are technically siloed, and this can make it difficult for them to get on the same page. Also makes the language barrier worse. For example, in Figma, you could put a black line and call it a stroke around a rectangle to make a button. But to create that same line in CSS, a developer would probably use a border instead of a stroke. So they're similar, but not the same. Creating a rectangle in Swift UI mean you'd need a different approach again. So how does all this lead to communication breakdowns? Well, we have a look at the total breakdown in communication and trust between designers and developers that happen on Reddit all the time. There's this great post, link in the comments, called Designers versus Developers and the Lies That They Tell Us. Recommend check it out. The original poster is just mad as hell, right? He's ranting about having to deal with developers who lie to him and they're not able to implement his designs, and he calls developers lazy and says their managers are too afraid to make them work. And as you can imagine, he gets chopped on in the comments. Responses saying that he doesn't know how to work with developers, that he seems to view them as subordinates, and they should just do what he says. But OP responds saying that it isn't up to him to build and nurture these relationships. He doesn't have time for that. That's what product managers are for. So maybe this guy is just an arrogant asshole, but I think it highlights a clear difference in the way that processes, languages, toolings, and ways of thinking make it really difficult for designers to work with the developers, and vice versa. And as a result, some people just don't bother trying. So how do we find common ground? What is the key to better developer-designer collaboration? Now, there's a great quote from Austin Bells from Facebook here. It says that good designers and good developers actually have a lot in common. It's not like we're green biologists and coffee baristas. We're all just making web stuff. So far, this article is focused on designers versus developers. Like they're engaged in some battle that only one side can win. But maybe to get designers and developers working together more successfully, we should focus on what unites them rather than what divides them. So Austin Bales believes that designers and developers share a love of clarity and simplicity, and they have a skill for defining and implementing patterns. Diogenes Brito, who was the former product designer at Slack, says that both designers and developers need to use a combination of convergent thinking, which is finding well-established correct solutions to problems, and divergent thinking, which is generating original ideas and creatively exploring multiple solutions. So they need both to problem solve and innovate. So how does recognizing the similarities between the two disciplines, not disciples, that's different, religious metaphor. So how does recognizing the similarities between the two disciplines help with developer-designer collaboration? Well, Brito would argue that it should lead to the blurring of boundaries between the two. And he describes himself as a full-stack designer and engineer, i.e. he does both design and development, and believes this is not impossible or rare to do both. Now, Netflix, as an example, is a company that has full-cycle developers, meaning their developers are jointly responsible for the full software lifecycle: design, development, testing, deployment, operations, and support. So in effect, their solution to design to dev misalignment is for designers to be able to code and developers to be able to design. But is this what those teams both want? Should one team have to change for the other, right? In October 2023, Figma conducted a great survey of 200 front-end developers asking about their relationship with designers, and 91% of respondents said they think designers should know how to code. Check out more details in the link in the comments, but for the highlights, 38% found it different communication styles with designers a challenge, and 40% struggled with designers using different tools or communication methods. So it all felt a bit lost in translation. Now, we shared this down on LinkedIn and we asked some product designers what they thought about it. Product designer Marek Kanavant said, yes, designers should know how to code, even if they're not expected to do it. And UX lead Ruben Lawrence said that knowing how to code should make you a better designer. Or developer Paul Passler said it's great when designers can code, or at least understand the challenges of front-end development. But knowing how to code isn't mandatory, nor should it be. And he also said that designers and UX professionals should focus on mastering their craft. So it seems like designers and developers have to choose whether to be a specialist or a generalist. With Netflix's model, a full-cycle developer has to be interested and proficient in the entire software development lifecycle. However, even Netflix acknowledges that some developers prefer focusing on becoming world-class experts in a narrow field, and that the need to be broad with reasonable depth in each area may be uncomfortable and sometimes unfulfilling. So adopting Netflix's full-cycle model means creating these hybrid workers that are good at both disciplines. But could it be excellent at one? And designers forced to think like coders could experience whiplash from this strange mental shift and the constraints. Instead of boldly exploring imaginative concepts, they end up preemptively limiting their ideas because of what's technically feasible. So what's the compromise? We should stay a specialist, but with a bit of extra knowledge. Erin Casilli, Senior Director of Product and Design at Xero, points out that there's a difference between knowing how to code and knowing what to code. She says that architects don't need to know how to build skyscrapers, surgeons don't need to know how to build pacemakers, and movie directors don't need to know how to act, but they do need to know what these things do, how they perform, and what their limits are. So to quote Christian Mikel, who was a former product designer at Grab, he said, "Learning the language doesn't mean mastering the code." Likewise, designers should understand the capabilities and limits of development. This involves at least a basic understanding of code, right? They don't need to become programmers. That takes years of hard work and commitment. And there's more important things for them to learn. More than coding, designers should learn about psychology, marketing, maybe even how to sell their apps, or at least their ideas, but definitely how to do user research. So it goes both ways. Learning the basics of design, how to create personas and empathy maps and facilitate user testing are all things that would massively benefit developers trying to deliver better products. So where does the problem with design and developer collaboration truly lie? Getting developers and designers to understand at least a bit of each other's craft is a way of getting them to talk to each other, to sit and work things through together and understand where the other is coming from. Which brings us to the real problem. It's not that designers can't code or that devs can't design, it's that too often developers and designers just aren't wanting to work together as a team. Now, there's another angry Reddit user, link in the comments, who's a great example of a designer that just has no interest in collaborating. So he was talking about a game designer that learned to code because he just found it too tough to keep explaining to programmers in detail how he wanted certain things to work. And he was frustrated that developers were regularly making small design decisions while writing the code that he no longer had impact on. And so he just found it was easier for him to build his own portfolio. He just make the games himself rather than rely on someone else to do the coding for him. So this game designer became a programmer to avoid having to debug with others. And this worked for him, but in most contexts, obviously it couldn't, right? Like software teams are juggling multiple projects with overlapping deadlines. So collaboration is absolutely necessary to avoid bottlenecks. And it's not just necessary, it's desirable, right? You get this creative friction, this exchange of ideas and viewpoints when you work with people with different perspectives. And this can, done well, spark innovation and lead to much richer products. So the question is, how do you encourage designers and developers to work together as a team? How do you bridge the design to dev tooling gap? So let's assume that we have designers and developers that understand each other's crafts and are willing to sit down and talk to each other, but they're still not. Why is this? Well, very often it's probably the tools that they're using and the chasm that lies between them. Because designers are creating things in Figma, while developers are managing their work in Jira. And for some teams, the solution is getting the devs to spend more time in the design tool. Figma is really pushing for this. If you've seen Figma's dev mode, they've designed it to ease design to dev handoff by allowing developers to inspect designs and see specs and annotations, or see different versions of a design file, or access and copy code snippets, or find ready for dev designs. The problem with this is it puts all the onus on a developer to learn how to navigate designs in Figma and work out which one they're supposed to be coding. And it also requires a Figma license. And most devs, in my experience, don't want this. They don't want to have to context switch from Figma to Jira, nor do they want to have to pay for the extra license for a different design tool. So if design handoff is easier using this system, it's only because the devs are being asked to do more work. Good luck with that. So improving collaboration shouldn't just be about asking designers or developers to do more. It should be understanding that each side has a different workflow, and there needs to be a bridge between the two. An app like Figma for Jira Pro can act as this bridge. It lets designers add point-in-time versions of Figma designs to Jira issues, ready for devs to implement. So a designer can choose different ways to display their designs on a Jira ticket, and a developer has the option to move that design around or zoom in and view it in full screen or its original size, and they can do this all from within Jira. Developers now can download the design in various formats, including SVG, or they can open up the information panel containing additional details about the design. So check it out, link below in the show notes, and I would love to hear your feedback on it. But in summary, there needs to be give and take on both sides, right? The best collaboration requires investment of time, understanding, and a bit of upskilling. But designers and developers don't need to become something they're not. nor do they need to add a whole new process to their workflow. There are better ways of bridging this gap. So if you want to find out more about how Figma Futura Pro could improve your developer-designer collaboration, check out the notes below. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. And if you don't, let me know in the comments. I really do appreciate your feedback. So thanks everyone. I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Nailed it!